Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Welcome back to another episode of the Research Works podcast. So glad that you could join us again today. And welcome back, Marissa. Thank you for coming back on hosting duties.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be back.
Always good to have you, because today we're going to be interviewing someone all the way from Ireland, so a completely different time zone again. Welcome, Assistant Professor Giovanni de Liberto. Hello, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for waking up early. We've got an evening time here and you've got a morning time slot, but I'm glad we can make this work. Congratulations on your article. When I saw it with absolute great interest. I just knew that it was something that we want to know more about and hopefully learn more from you as well. This particular article was published in Nature Communication in late 2023, and it's titled Emergence of the Cortical Encoding of Phonetic Features in the First Year of Life.
An excellent title, and I can't wait to delve into this more with you, Giovanni. But for our listeners, let's tell them a bit more about you, our guest today, and first author of this paper. Giovanni is a distinguished academic with a robust background in information and computer engineering, holding degrees from the University of Padova in Italy. His notable journey in auditory neuroscience, which commenced with a PhD from Trinity College Dublin, has been marked by his significant contributions to understanding brain mechanisms in speech comprehension. An expert in data analysis methods applied to brain data, Giovanni's work spans both methodological and practical aspects, including the development of novel experimental frameworks for investigating cortical auditory processing. His research also delves into auditory perception theories, notably predictive processing, and finds practical application in brain-computer interfaces and monitoring language development. Currently, as an assistant professor in intelligent systems at Trinity College Dublin, Giovanni continues to expand his expertise, encompassing aspects of speech communication and decision-making. Okay, before we delve into this wonderful article, we're going to do our icebreaker question. Giovanni, if you could eliminate one thing from your daily routine, what would that be and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there is anything I would remove, but for sure I'd like to have more time to do more things. But I can't pinpoint any single thing that I would remove at the moment.
That's actually quite a good thing. Look, what comes to mind for a question like this, there's two things. I would say, if I didn't have to brush my teeth because my teeth just naturally, magically was clean and I didn't have to do anything, that would be something I'd love to remove, because there's nothing worse than wanting to go to bed and you're really tired. You're like, I've got to brush my teeth. That annoys me. And the other thing I feel like I could eliminate is, even though I've got long hair and you think, you just have to deal with it, I really don't like washing my own hair. But the worst part is drying my own hair. So I would rather not have to dry my hair.
Just do what I do and let it dry naturally.
It's not a bad solution.
It works, trust me, you see.
What about you? What would you eliminate?
I think I would eliminate elements of cleaning. Look, if I could eliminate that and pass that on, I would not be upset. Yeah, particularly bathrooms. Not a great fan.
True.
Obviously, it needs to be done, and I'm grateful we have a bathroom and all of those things. But yeah, any cleaning really. I'm happy to give up.
Basically, our household chores is what we'd like to give up. Yeah. So this had nothing to do with the article, as very clear. So let's get back into the article. But you all need to know us a little bit more. The practicalities is Giovanni wants to be able to do more in his day, and I just want to stop brushing my teeth and drying my hair is what this comes down to. Now, this research investigates the development of phonetic feature encoding in infants' cortices during the first year of life, using EEG recordings of infants listening to nursery rhymes at 4, 7 and 11 months and comparing with adults. The study reveals a significant increase in phonetic feature encoding over the first year. Notably, invariant encoding of phonetic categories essential for speech comprehension emerges from 7 months. So this study highlights the progressive refinement of infants' neural speech processing capabilities, providing valuable insights into early language acquisition. Meaty one.
This is incredible because 7 months is so young.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to delve into here. But Giovanni, I want to start right at the beginning. And can you explain to us, what do you mean by cortical encoding?
Sure, yeah. I mean, cortical encoding, there are two words there, right? One is cortical. So it refers to the human cortex, which is the outermost part of the human brain, which is responsible for lots of different functions, from memory to sensory functions, so processing the what you see and what you hear. And encoding is instead referring to how we represent certain type of information. So in this case, we are talking about how does the brain and this part of the brain that we call the cortex represent different properties of the speech. And so the idea is that to understand the speech, we need to take a sound and transform it into meaning.
Okay, yeah.
But there is many steps in between, right?
Yes.
So the question is, we understand that the brain is going to represent or to encode the sound, and is going to represent and encode the meaning. But which of these intermediate stages is it going to represent, to encode, and how?
Right. I love that. So I think, once you break it down like that, there's actually so many steps to it. and that's so important for what we would know as learning and how we actually learn something. It's the whole process of it. But that's really cool. Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question, what inspired you to investigate the cortical encoding of phonetic features in infants? And how does this study contribute to our understanding of early language development and acquisition? So I guess starting at the start, how did you come across studying this area?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a bit like what you said. There are these many steps, and we don't know exactly how the brain does this. So I kind of went in order. So the first step is the processing of acoustics, and people were studying that. So the processing of the actual sound properties.
Yeah.
And people were studying that before I started my career in science, in academia. And so I just decided to try to go to the next stage and see whether the human cortex was encoding these more categorical units that we call phonemes, which are even smaller than syllables.
Right.
So it was a bit of the next step.
Okay.
And it gets, I suppose, it gets more complicated and more linguistic as you proceed.
Yeah.
So since I don't have a background in linguistics, but I have a background in engineering, and I saw it as a more of an attempt to dissect how the brain is processing meaning, and just to go to the next stage. While other colleagues, they come to this field with a particular interest in syntax, in prosody, because they have particular interest in if you're interested in social communication, you would be particularly interested in prosody,
yes,
which carries a lot of our emotions and intentions, and maybe you're less interested in the phoneme. So
sure.
I suppose my approach was very in engineering.
But that's good. It combines beautifully then with those. You need that engineering insight to be able to, I guess, give insight into the other things like the language comprehension and acquisition.
That's
and things
right.
like that.
I love that.
So tell us more about how does this study contribute to our understanding of early language acquisition?
Yeah, that's a good point. The literature on language acquisition in the first year, in the first couple of years, is rich. People have been studying that for years, and we learned a lot of things about when babies learn what. The problem there is that how were these experiments carried out? How was this knowledge gathered? And there were basically many simple experiments.
Right.
And all together led to the knowledge we have now. For example, there was a famous experiment probably 15 years ago, maybe even 20, where they were studying whether babies and when babies can discriminate English phonemes, so English syllables,
Sure.
actually, and when can they discriminate Japanese syllables.
Oh, okay.
And they did this, they studied this over time, and they saw that at a certain point of time, I can't remember exactly when, usually around 9-10 months or even earlier, you're still able to discriminate the phonemes, the syllables of your native language, but you're less capable of distinguishing those of a non-native language.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that you're not able to learn Japanese when you're 3.
Yeah.
But it just means that in the first year of life, you're already showing this ability to specialize in your native language.
It's amazing.
Wow.
Now, the problem with that study is that it was done with 3 syllables.
Okay.
And basically babies just listen to one syllable and then another syllable and another syllable, and they looked at their reactions
Right.
to see whether they could hear a difference or not.
Okay.
So that is I'm sorry, in explaining this in the
No, it's
long
good.
I took
Keep
the long
going.
route.
Yeah.
So those studies are great, and there is hundreds of studies like that looking at simple features.
Yes.
Now the question is, does the knowledge that we gain from these studies with 3 syllables, does it extend to the real world? Does it extend to the scenario where you're listening to continuous speech or nursery rhymes?
Good point. Yeah.
It's not obvious, because if you can say the difference between ba and ga, that doesn't mean that you perceive that difference as you're listening to continuous speech.
Yes.
If any of you or the listeners speak a second language, like I speak a bit of French, studying French in terms of single syllables is a thing, but speaking, in a real scenario, that's
completely
different.
Very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were trying to redefine a little bit this map that we have of when babies perceive different, in this case, different phonemes, but we plan to do it for other features in the future. But in the context of naturalistic stimuli, and in this case, nursery rhymes.
Yeah.
Great. So that brings me to my next point, especially from your engineering background and what you would have learned along your studies so far. We've touched on this with other podcasts, but in your eyes, what is so special about that first year of life?
Yeah, I mean, it's the moment, is a period of time where your brain is most plastic, we will say, is most capable of learning.
Wow.
Your connection, I suppose, your neural infrastructure is not solid enough, is not mature enough for you to communicate the way we would show what we learn.
Yes.
But we are learning nonetheless.
Taking things in.
So in other words, the baby can't speak, but the baby is learning how to speak.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
Because there is that lack of feedback at the very start, and parents on the call, on the parents that are listening now, they will know about when babies start to smile for the first time. That's the first type of feedback that we get that is really happy and satisfying. And but when they start to speak, I suppose, is when we understand, okay, they're actually learning this and that. But in the first year of life, they learn so much. Yeah. And we don't know a lot about that learning, exactly because we don't have that feedback.
Yeah, it's so true.
And I'm so interested to see, like, obviously from an engineering perspective, how you're studying in terms of what children are encoding. I know as parents we're taught, to engage and talk and sing nursery rhymes and things like that to children from a young age. It's so good to have the science to back all of that up, particularly in what you've looked into in your study. So the aim, as you outlined in the article, was to investigate acoustic and acoustically invariant encoding of speech sounds across the first year of life by measuring the neural tracking of speech. Can you break this down for us a bit more?
Yeah, so there is a couple of points. One is the acoustically invariant, which is important, and the other is the neural tracking of speech. So the neural tracking of speech is a phenomenon that happens in our brain, that I wouldn't say that we discovered it recently, but we discover how to measure it reliably in recent years with engineering methods. So we use basically electrical measurements from electroencephalography, and that's very, very difficult signal because it's very noisy. We say there is a lot going on that has nothing to do with what we want to study. We have 64 sensors or 100 sensors, depending on the system, that try to pick up activity from billions of neurons. So there is a lot going on. But what we can do with this technology is to measure when the brain is synchronizing with our speech or with our music. So basically, you can imagine in the case of music where we have melodies, we have a sequence of notes, and our brain is going to respond to each of these notes. Imagine for every of these notes, there is a little excitation in our brain. There is a little electrical discharge in our brain. So you can imagine it as a line with a bump, and another bump for every note. So that happens in sync with the melody, a little bit delayed because your brain takes maybe a few milliseconds to respond to the melody, 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds. Nonetheless, that is synchronized. So we call that neural tracking. So that is a methodological aspect, basically, that measures this phenomenon of the brain synchronizing with the stimulus for various reasons. The other point was acoustically invariant. Acoustically invariant. So imagine if I was speaking like a robot, like a old 80s robot, and saying the same syllable in with the identical sound every single time. So if I was saying, I English is not my native language, so I won't even try. But imagine me saying, I don't know.
Oh no, I've got one in my head. As soon as he said 80s robot, I was like, I do not comprehend.
I wasn't going to try.
Beautiful.
Good, thank you.
I feel like that's something I've seen on TV before. The minute you said it, I was like, that's all I hear in my head. Sorry.
But it's that monotone, isn't it? Is that what it is? Yep. Okay.
Yes, that is 100 times better what I was going to do. So thank you.
You're really welcome.
Add it to your list of talents.
So in that case, you have the same syllable that is produced in the same identical way every time, the same sound. So in that case, there is no distinction between sound and category, right? Every time there is a particular syllable, the sound is the same. But in real speech, it's not like that. Every time I say a syllable, a different sound is going to come out. And that's when we have a distinction between the sound we produce and the category we perceive. Another example is my voice versus the voice of someone else. We might be reading the same content, the same word. And so the category we perceive, the words, the syllables are the same, but the voice is completely different. So acoustically invariant means that every time that we hear a syllable or a phoneme, there is somewhere in the brain a response that, responds differently because there is a different acoustics. But there is also a part of the brain that responds in the same way, that responds to the category.
Okay.
That was a great explanation. That was really great. And I mean, I play music, and so when you say that, I kind of think, the staccato elements to it and the legato, there's the different elements that distinguish, and the idea that we can track this now. You said you used EEG recordings. I imagine this was quite a complex thing to do in infants. how did you actually do that in infants? And tell us that, because I'm just imagining all the complexities that you probably would have had to experience to do this.
Yeah, there is a reason if people hadn't done this before. It's just very hard.
Did you say 64 markers before?
I'm sorry?
Did you say that there were 64 markers before?
Yeah. In this case, I don't remember exactly. It's around 60 or 64, yeah.
Wow.
Usually these systems have from 24 to 128, or some people even 256, but in babies it would stay, some most studies would literally stick 3-4 electrodes manually. And while what we do is that we have a cap, like a swimming cap, that has these cables attached, these sensors. Basically you put them in some saline solution. There are some little sponges that absorb this saline solution, and then you just put it around like a swimming cap on the head, and these sensors are already connected, and they're not giving any electricity. They're just measuring the naturally occurring electrical deflections that the brain is producing.
Wow.
So it's hard, and look, I don't really do brain recordings in babies. So this was done by the University of Cambridge. So my collaborator, so the senior author of the study is Professor Usha Goswami. She is the one that is expert on that side of things. And Dr. Attaheri, he's the one that led the actual data collection. So he's a co-first author of the study, and for a good reason, because that's, as you said, that was a massive endeavor. Now, how you actually do this? The baby is placed on the mother's lap. You don't want to take the baby away from the mother, right? So the baby stays with the mother, and you wait for the right moment. That's important. You don't want to start the experiment as they cry or 1 minute before getting fed. So you wait for the right moment. And then you place the cap, and basically they are watching these and listening to these nursery rhymes, and they're all read from the same person. So the first challenge is attention, having nursery rhymes, having stimuli that are attention grabbing.
So
listening to syllables, like in old experiments, you can do it just for a few minutes because it's just not interesting.
Yes, of course.
Listening to nursery rhymes, in this case, we also had a video in front of the participants that served as of the person that was actually singing.
Right.
That was fairly attention grabbing, and they could do the task, which was simply to, look at the video, to watch the video and to listen to the nursery rhymes without, as we say in Ireland, without going bananas. There are a few challenges. For example, so the same babies were recorded 3 times. Because it was a longitudinal study.
Sure. Okay.
4, 7, and 11 months of age, they move differently.
Yes.
4 months of age.
A lot happens in that time.
I mean, look, at 7 months of age, they move more. That's how it is. On average, then it changes between different babies. So there are a few challenges. Then other challenges, the skull is very thin when they are 4 months of age.
Sure.
And is much thicker when they are 11 months of age. So the signal changes. So there are lots of challenges.
That's incredible. Just to think of, even just to conceive, to do this is quite amazing. How many infants were actually included in this study where we're actually going to look at the results for now?
For this paper, 50.
That's amazing.
50 infants that were recorded 3 times. There is more. The idea was to just get these results on one group, and then also to consider the other group as a validation.
Sure.
But there is other reasons. We have been looking into predicting language outcomes later on in life. So using EEG. This is from another study that is published. where basically you take the data when they're in the first year of life and try to predict their language outcome when they're 2. So how good they are at speaking and at that age.
You can see why that would be of great interest.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to see where that goes.
Giovanni, brings me to my next point. Your study reveals, well, one of the points your study reveals is a significant increase in phonetic feature encoding over the first year of life. How did this finding align with or differ from previous understandings we had of infant speech development and processing?
Yeah, gladly they do align. They do align. So we're not changing our understanding in that sense. It's still a bit uncertain in that some studies say that we perceive these units a bit earlier, a bit later.
Yeah.
And here we just have the resolution that we have, which is 4, 7, and 11. But the important thing here is that at 7 months of age, we see this first, the emergence of this categorical, so acoustically invariant, as we said before, encoding, but we don't really see it at 4. And recently there have been a few studies that started to look into the natural predisposition into this kind of sensitivities to different sounds. And other studies that looked, in fact, at newborns, like in the first month of life, in the first few days of life, and finding that there is some ability to discriminate different sounds at that age already. And so I suppose here we're trying to clarify that whatever skills you have when you're born, that is most likely not a category, an encoding of categories, because that's something that you learn around those 6, 7 months of age, which is in line with older studies. But there is a bit this trend now, because now we can do these recordings on newborns. So there are studies that start going in a direction that I don't think is relevant for continuous speech perception in this case.
Gosh, so if the coding, phonetic categories really emerges around that 7 months, what does that mean to us? Like I sort of, my interpretation, I suppose, would be it's a really important phase at 7 months. You want to be into support further language processing. You would want to be seeing lots of nursery rhymes and engaging. Is that what we would take home from that, or are there other things that we should be thinking about as well?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the nursery rhyme bit is very exciting. I think the thing is that it's hard to get it out of this study only. So our observations on the relevance of nursery rhymes comes from a combination of studies on this data set that we've been working on for a couple of years. Now, I had the lead on this study. That's why I'm talking about this, but there is also these others. And I suppose the point is, in this study, we were measuring this acoustically invariant encoding, but in the other study, we were measuring also the other phenomena that happens in the brain. So since you're born, you have mechanisms that basically, how do you explain it? So there is a lot of talking in the literature about neural oscillations. So these brain rhythms that you might have heard about, alpha rhythms, etc., and how those change as you develop. So when babies are born, there is primarily low frequencies, so slow rate, so slow oscillations going on, and you can measure that. It's no surprise. And as your brain matures, you start getting faster rhythms. And that maturation is thought to relate, or some colleagues think that relates to what you can learn at what stage. What we could see was that these oscillations, these rhythms, they relate to speech very early on in life. So at 4 months of age, there is already this relationship between these oscillations and the speech sound, not the categories, but the speech sound. And other colleagues, they saw that relationship even earlier in newborns, which I found very cool. And so that mechanism is thought to be important for then learning the categories later on.
Okay.
And the rhythms that seem to be the most important for that learning are the rhythms actually that we use for nursery rhymes.
It's interesting.
That we naturally produce. So long story short, it's important to use nursery rhymes and what comes naturally to us, not just as a form of attention grabbing or a form of relaxation,
There's more to
but
it.
actually for language learning. Yes.
Yeah, engagement and play. And even though they, like you said, they're young at that age, and you look at them and sometimes because they're not talking back to you and they might give you the odd smile or grimace or cry or, you know, but that how enriching it is for them to be.
They're learning all the time.
Yeah.
And I just think of how natural it is to do nursery rhymes and sing nursery rhymes. Like it's part of how we do grow up. But the value of doing it in infants at 7 months, when you think they're not doing a great deal, they're starting to interact with you a little bit. But you just do need to keep doing it because it's important for what they're encoding at that time. That's a really interesting point. So for us, I guess, as clinicians who work in more of a clinical population and we are maybe meeting other children who might have possibly some developmental delay or a delay in speech sounds. I know this wasn't what you studied, but do you see how what you've found here could influence other populations like, I don't know, like developmental language disorder? Like, is there implications for that?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, that's one of the objectives of the senior author, Professor Goswami. She has lots of interest and experience in studying, especially developmental dyslexia, but other language impairments and language, conditions related to language deficit.
Right.
So this study, in that sense, is it's more of a foundation, of a methodological foundation. So we can measure this mechanism, these acoustically invariant units. We can track how this happens throughout time, and with that other study, we could also see a relationship between these metrics that I mentioned before of synchronization at different ages with language outcome at 2 years of age.
Sure.
So now we haven't used this to study developmental dyslexia or other conditions yet, because basically when the baby is born, you don't know if the baby is going to have one condition or another, which means that we need to collect lots of data from many, many different people that are at risk. It's awful to say, but hoping that enough of them actually have a condition. So it's really awful to say, but trying to capture a sample that has enough of those conditions and then try to do prediction. So the impact there would be, can we do an early diagnosis of certain conditions? And then we can talk about intervention to see if we can mitigate certain issues that, especially, for example, in dyslexia, you can't really diagnose it properly before 6-7 years of age. When there are issues in school, maybe, and some children, then they deal with that absolutely fine, but others maybe they take a little bit longer for the diagnosis. So if we could measure, since dyslexia is related to this phonological impairment that we've known for a while now, if we could measure this in every baby,
interesting,
as one of the standard tests, then we could try to get a prediction of whether this baby is going to have that condition or not.
And then could it help us identify, I guess, those who might be more at risk, which then you might, give the parents more coaching around the benefit of, nursery rhymes and things like that.
Because that's always the goal, isn't it? We talk so much about, it's not new to anyone anymore that early intervention is vital. We know that early detection is so important, so we can get going straight away, because we know that the brain is very plastic. The earlier we can intervene, hopefully we have better outcomes. And we know that from so much of what we do in our clinical work, but there's still so much that's unknown. And I love that this is just another piece of the puzzle, isn't it, of going, okay, there's these amazing phenomena that happens at this particular age. It's as early as 7 months. and there's things that you could possibly do because the brain is learning this at the moment. So it just shapes our thinking about what interventions could be possible. Yeah.
And it's really exciting because where to from here? Like, I feel like this is just the start. And obviously I'm sure there's future plans that you have. Can you discuss any of your future research plans with us, or where to from here?
Yeah, applying for research funding, that's the main thing. Because these studies are expensive, not much in technology. They're expensive in the sense that, you need to pay these volunteers that, to give them a reimbursement,
of course,
and ensure that they come back, 3 times. And like the ideal scenario would be to track them for much longer than the first year of life, to see the emergence of other linguistic properties. We talked about phonemes and the other stages, later on, when they start to combining words and to understand the syntax, there is lots of other metrics you could get out of that.
Yeah.
So I would love to, and I will apply for funding that would support a study for much longer.
Yeah.
And those are difficult.
Yeah.
Those are difficult. I've been in contact with other colleagues that do similar work. And so I'm either going to do it, by myself or with Professor Goswami, or collaborate with colleagues that have the resources to run these experiments, because I think there is a lot of potential. The other direction that would be extremely interesting is, in fact, to do a study on language impairment, and so applying the same methodology to try to predict not only language outcomes but also impairment later on in life. Yeah. So that's the kind of directions I want to pursue related to this study. But there is one other that I'd like to mention.
Oh yeah, yes.
which is in children and also later on in life, studying social interaction.
Yes.
So rather than just perception, having participants interact to each other, and that's very important because it's not just how the brain encodes speech, but it's also how the brain encodes the other person.
That's right. Yeah.
And that can lead to, studying other things that I'm starting to approach now, such as social anxiety and things like that.
Gosh, it's all
there's a lot. You can just keep going.
There's so much to it. Well, I would love now to hear you do a bit of a summary for our producer Ed, who has a bit of a sort of, I guess, an engineering brain himself and has been listening in on this podcast. So let's see, hey? Let's introduce the next segment. Tell it to Ed. Ed is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening on this conversation, and I'm sure he's pretty interested in some of the things you have to say and would love to learn some more about it. So, Giovanni, before he has time for a question for you, I'll get you to summarise this research and why it's important in about 60 seconds or so. And then after that, Ed, you can ask a question. So Giovanni, take it away, 60 seconds.
Yeah, sounds great. This research is interesting because we are studying how the brain represents speech, in particular phonemes, in the first year of life. And we track that representation, how that representation evolves at 4, 7, and 11 months of age. And so in a way, we are replicating what the literature was saying already. We are confirming the literature, but we are explaining that what we knew from the literature before actually generalizes to real speech perception. And the take-home message there in relation to nursery rhymes is that nursery rhymes help you to learn speech. It's not just a form of attention grabbing. Help you to understand speech. And so we should, of course, we use it naturally, but we should think about it of something more than something to put the baby to sleep. It is a form of teaching. It is a form of learning how to speak. And so we should make sure that we show our mouth as we speak, that we say nursery rhymes that are relevant to their age, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the main take-home message.
That's good. That's wonderful. A good summary. A few extra things in there too. I like it. All right, Ed, your turn.
Thank you. This conversation has been very, very fascinating, and I love this whole, it's the 4, 7 and 11 months, isn't it? So obviously, like children are sponges. I guess they're taking up a lot of information from around the world. And I just had a bit of a question about the nursery rhymes and music. And so I have a bit of a musical skill, I guess. I have like perfect pitch. And I think that was developed very, very early on. There seems to be a general consensus that perfect pitch is attained super early in life or you never attain it. And the thinking there is that you need to be exposed to quite a lot of variance in sounds and the type of music and rhythms and making things very, very different, very varied. I'm trying to find another word for varied, but always very different. But from the sounds of it, this study was about very rhythmic, very repetitive kind of elements. And I'm wondering, were any of the children kind of, I guess they're very, very young at this point, did they show any kind of musical traits that kind of led towards this kind of development of perfect pitch? Like, are they different kind of children? Is there any synergies between making everything rhythmic and repetitive versus varied and
melodic as well?
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, because nursery rhymes are melodic and, rhythmic. All right. Take it away, Giovanni.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ed, you're bringing up here basically one of the things we are studying now on the same data, which is nursery rhymes. Of course, there is speech, but there is also melody.
Yeah.
So, and there is others that have been looking into melody specifically, even at earlier ages, so, and it's interesting because very early on, they can already distinguish certain patterns. And so there is questions on, of course, rhythm can be perceived in the womb as well, that we know. But pitch, it gets all filtered out by all the layers that are in between the ears and the outside. So basically babies would hear something like woo, woo.
Okay. Yeah.
So the rhythm before birth, yes. Pitch, I think it's primarily after you're born. Now, of course, our first time point was at 4 months of age, so it's not very early. Even though it might seem very early. So the difference so we haven't looked just to answer your question, we haven't looked into this in this study yet, but we are looking into it. The one important distinction between speech and music, Ed, is that if you just get the child to watch Japanese TV without any form of feedback, any form of interaction, they won't necessarily learn Japanese. While with music, things are different. So music is more of an implicit learning. You learn it simply by being exposed.
Yeah.
And of course, being engaged is always going to improve it.
Yeah.
So also the perfect pitch business, that's something more as we say in neuroscience, at the lower level of the processing hierarchy. So it's something that happens probably early on in the pathway, in the neural pathway. So I don't have an answer for you, but that's a very important question, I think, and so we are looking into that.
God, it just shows how complex it is and how amazing the brain is.
Incredible.
We're trying to understand it, right? There's so many layers to all of it. And I think this just highlights how important it is to be so multidisciplinary in investigating this, right? To have engineers looking at this and people who play music and we're looking at it from a clinical perspective of how we apply it to kids. So, yeah, this really wonderful. Giovanni, thank you so much for your time today in speaking with us and explaining these concepts. It's very new to us. what we know about early intervention is great, but you explain the mechanism behind it. And that's really, really interesting. So thank you for your time. And for our listeners, please head to our website, researchworks.net. We'll put a link to this paper, of course, so you can have a look a lot more into this in more detail too. And there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as part of your PD requirements too. But for now, gosh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very insightful. So thank you, Giovanni.
Yeah.
Thanks a million.
Oh, we loved having you. To all of our listeners, thank you. We'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
Bye.